Hello, and welcome. Welcome to another edition of Atlas Information Live. I'm your host, Atlas Alex, and today we are going to hopefully take an important step forward in freeing ourselves from the great bamboozling, the great scam, the great fraud that has the whole of humanity wrapped around its finger. In searching for a appropriate background image for today's live stream, I searched and searched and I found all sorts of appropriate images, including paintings from that famous work of literature, Faust. It's a stage play, it's an opera. And however, I could not find an image, a painting that fit the parameters of the live stream background here. So I had to settle for the next best thing from modern mythology. And here we have, if you recognize these two fellows, we have Captain Jean-Luc Picard, and whispering into his ear, we have that perhaps most famous of modern sci-fi tricksters. We have, well, maybe next to Loki from the Marvel universe, I suppose, but we have Q from the Q continuum. And here we have Q whispering in Jean-Luc Picard's ear one of his many, many scams and schemes and playful jests, toying with the Federation and toying with Jean-Luc. It's one of Q's favorite pastimes on the Next Generation. And the image is appropriate because of today's topic. Because when we think of scams, when we think of fraud, con artists, or even advertising, salespeople, propaganda, anyone trying to convince you of something or trying to get you to go along with their plans, to see things from their point of view and accept their point of view or their perspective as the truth. So you are probably very aware that the term con artist itself derives from confidence. These are confidence artists because they win over your confidence. You place your trust in them. So you follow their lead or you follow their suggestions because they make you feel confident that to follow their suggestions is the correct course of action and is the best course of action for you. It will result in the best outcomes. The outcomes most consistent with or aligned with your desires, let's say. And very good con artists, very good scammers and fraudsters are able to plant a desire that you didn't even have, or draw to the surface a desire that you never knew you had. And there's that famous, I suppose you would call it a science fiction movie or sort of science fiction thriller by Christopher Nolan, starring Leonardo DiCaprio, called Inception. And the whole point of that film is that there's this elite team of sort of secret psychological agents who use dreams and the dream world, the astral plane, we would say, to go deeper and deeper into the subconscious of an individual, and they will plant an idea there, the seed of an idea that will then take root in their subconscious mind and grow and eventually manifest in their consciousness. That idea that was implanted deep within the subconscious. That's the whole plot of Inception. And if you have ever been watching late night television and you stumble across an infomercial for some new fandangled product or kitchen gadget or something on an infomercial, and they're showing how incredible it is and how it's going to make your life so much easier and better and more convenient, and you're watching this thing and you're like, wow, that would make my life easier and better and more convenient. And all of a sudden you're finding yourself attracted to this messaging, and you're finding yourself becoming identified and attached to the idea of owning this time-saving, life-improving gadget. And you did not have that desire prior to coming across that infomercial. So this is very much a real phenomenon that exists, and uh, it happens regularly in marketing and advertising and in politics and in stage performances and in the parlance of psychology and hypnosis. It is known as suggestion. This idea that it is possible to suggest, make to the power of suggestion is precisely that the power to plant a seed, plant an idea in someone's mind, which they very quickly adopt as the truth. And those who are very skilled at these techniques are able to make it seem to the individual that the idea was theirs, that the idea was never implanted, that they came up with the idea themselves. And that's what makes the idea all the more potent and all the more effective, because the individual is not aware of the fact that that came from outside of them. It came from inside of them. And in more recent years, let's say, the robocalls and telephone scams have gone to a whole new level, where because they're using technology to mimic official calls from corporations and banks, because we all know banks, generally speaking, do not call us. And if they do, it's not a person who calls us. They have the system call us and say, oh, this has been happening, or this is happening with your account, or that's happening with your account. So the scammers have set up their own machines to make robocalls that sound very official, like they're coming from the government, or they're coming from your bank, or they're coming from your credit card company. And they give you a number to call, or a website, or some other action that you can take, where when you go there, they ask for your personal information, your banking information. And in that moment, they've captured your account and they're probably cleaning it out. The point is that being scammed and being taken advantage of and being exploited by individuals and groups who are very, very skilled at manipulation. They're very skilled at pushing the right buttons and pulling the right levers in our psychology to get us to go along with whatever it is they want us to do, because of how they are, in effect, manipulating our psychology, how they are working us from within. Again, and there's a myriad number of ways in which they do this, including emotional manipulation, and they can use sensory tricks and tactics. There's really no way to cover the vast breadth and scope of the ways in which others can take advantage of us if we fall into their trap, into their web of lies and misrepresentation and misinformation and miscommunication. Because really, there's a whole spectrum of dishonesty. And that spectrum includes propaganda and misinformation and disinformation. And there are all sorts of reasons why individuals spread such false information. For instance, just today I came across a meme on Facebook where there was this whole long, elaborate story about a hiker who had dropped their cell phone, and that cell phone fell off a cliff. And in the process of falling, it hit a ledge, and as it hit the ledge, it snapped a photo. And they included the photo in the meme, and it was a cat with 3 little kittens on an 18-inch ledge on the side, on the cliff face. And that the search and rescue team somehow found this camera with this photograph in it. And it was this whole long, elaborate story. And they showed you the picture and everything. And it was so meticulously crafted. And it was clear that literally hundreds and hundreds of people were emotionally invested in the story and saying how incredible it was and how beautiful it was and this, that, because there was this whole backstory for this cat and this whole, like, what happened to the cat. The search and rescue team went back and they rescued this cat and the kittens from the ledge and all this kind of nonsense. Well, the photo was obviously either photoshopped or it was an AI photo, and even the story may have been concocted by AI. We don't know exactly what the origin was, but that the story was false is 100% certain. It's 100% certain, right down to the impossibility of the photo, the way it was framed, and like some technical details related to the photos, AI generated, because real photos don't work that way, all the way to the way in which the story was structured and written. It was not a news story. It was not a story of nonfiction. It was not a biographical, journalistic story. It was written as a dramatic story unfolding like a fairy tale or like any other drama. And the details in the story were obviously made up, because someone writing the story from reality would not have included such details, because they would have been impossible to know. Regardless, the point is that in that particular case, that's someone spreading a story online with every attempt to make it appear to be real and true. They're not selling anything. There's no obvious benefit to the scam. And some might even argue that there's no harm done. It's just like it's technically a hoax. And this is a kind of a roundabout way of getting to this particular type of scam. But when you think of hoaxes, there have been hoaxes in the past where they gained popularity among the nefarious because, for instance, if you could hoax the mummy or the skeleton of a famous person, or you could hoax the skeleton or a disembodied body part of Bigfoot, or you hoaxed, Bigfoot's footprints, I guess, big 18, 20-inch, 24-inch footprints in concrete or in what's supposed to be petrified mud, or however you've done it. There have been opportunities in the past in traveling fairs and in, certain museums, etc., where you could set up shop and you could charge money for the naive public to come in. It was 5 cents, or 2 cents or whatever it was, to come in and see the legendary Bigfoot or the skeleton of Bigfoot, or this, or the mummy of Amhotep III or whatever, brought from Egypt or whatever. And you could construct and concoct an elaborate dog and pony show to exploit the naivete of the public with this hoax. And that's in some rare cases, hoaxes could generate direct income. Other hoaxes would be, again, telling the story and getting that story published, maybe in the newspaper, maybe a book deal, maybe in some other way. But some hoaxes never really led or lead to financial gain. And it makes one ask the question, why do it? Why hoax? Why spend all that time and energy creating this elaborate lie, this elaborate scheme, just for fun? And that's one of the reasons why I have Q in the background, because Q is a member of the Q continuum. These immortal beings that obviously they have no use for material gain. They have nothing to benefit. And Q is sent to study the Enterprise and study Jean-Luc and the Federation, to get to know human beings through the captain and his crew. And in a way, he's there to sort of test them and put them through their paces, so to speak. But you get the sense that Q is really enjoying himself. It's like a cat toying with a mouse. If you've ever watched a cat playing with a mouse or toying with a mouse, the cat's not hungry. The cat's not playing with its food. It's just playing. It's it's just doing what cats do, which is dominate and and batting around and chase and bat and paw and scratch and all the things that cats do. But an animated toy is so much more fun for a cat. And what's more animated than a mouse terrified trying to get away? So that's great fun for the cat to play and torment that little mouse. The cat's just playing. It's just doing what cats do. And that's an important aspect to consider when broaching this topic of scams and scammers and being bamboozled. Because as we know from, maybe nowadays it might be a little bit different, but in the past there have been personalities, characters, real life characters who lived the criminal life, but they lived the high life, and they also very much lived in the spotlight, in the very much in the eye of the public, and they relished that publicity. And individuals from Al Capone to Bonnie and Clyde, and then there was gunslingers, cowboys. There have been lots of criminal elements throughout history who did not hide in the shadows. And it wasn't Bonnie and Clyde, it was Dillinger. Dillinger was famous for robbing banks for the thrill of it. I mean, clearly there was a financial benefit as well, but eventually he got to a point where he didn't need the money anymore necessarily. It was just so easy, and but there was always that rush. There was always that something associated with it that it became like an addiction. It was a pastime, a thrill. And there's an element of deception that we have to consider. And that element is the element of success. The element of successfully deceiving, well, a con artist would call it their mark. In other words, just like a marksman, a sharpshooter, a bowman, or someone throwing darts even, right? There's the mark, right? The bullseye. And hitting your mark is the mark of mastery of that particular skill of being a sharpshooter. To hit the mark, to hit the bullseye. And for a con artist, someone who relies on winning the trust of their mark, right? Hitting their mark is when their mark opens up and gives in to whatever it is that they're hitting them with, so to speak. That carries with it the same kind of rush, the same kind of thrill of the marksman hitting the target, a hunter taking down his prey. I mean, there's a reason why people go sport hunting or sport fishing, right? You land the big fish, which, by the way, is one of the ways that salespeople, what's one of the terms that organizations or salespeople will use to refer to new clients. You know, I landed a big account today. Well, that's language that comes from sport fishing. And if you're an organization and you're doing business to business sales, and the customer or client that you're trying to land is another corporation and maybe a publicly traded company or some multinational corporation, well, you're not just trying to land a big fish. Now you're trying to land a whale. In the way that in the film Casino, Robert De Niro, the manager of the casino, is referring to the Japanese Ichigara as a whale because he plays in the most expensive baccarat table, and he bets $1 million a hand at baccarat. You know, he's a whale, and so to land a whale, exactly as it suggests, right? Like if you were sport fishing and you reeled in a whale. But you see, it's not by accident that the language around advertising, sales, manipulation, fraud, con artists, illusionists, the language comes from hunting, marksmanship, sport fishing. There's a target you're trying to hit, or there's something that you're trying to reel in. There's an exploitative, dominant aspect here. And it's a sport. There is sport to it. It requires skill. It requires patience. It requires perception and awareness. It requires knowing where to fish or knowing where to hunt. And it requires stealth and camouflage or charm. Because as in when you're fishing, if you've ever gone fishing, you know that when you have a fish on the hook, on the end of your line, you can't just reel it in willy-nilly. You got to reel it in and let it go, and reel it in and let it go, because the fish is fighting you. And so there's like this dance, this push and pull, and this moments of reeling it in and moments of letting it go and letting the fish think that it's gotten away. And there's a skill and a tact and strategy and tactics to being able to reel in the fish. And the bigger the fish, the more it fights, the more you have to be delicate with how you reel it in. Otherwise, the hook's going to come out, or the line's going to snap, or something else is going to give, and you're going to lose the fish. The reason why I'm coming at this from this perspective is because we have to know our enemy. You cannot expect to gain the upper hand. You cannot expect to be able to outwit or best your opponent if you aren't able to put yourself in your opponent's shoes and understand and comprehend how they go about getting the best of you. And knowing that being bamboozled, being hoodwinked, right? These are these great words. They're a little bit archaic now, but they're fantastic words from the 19th and early 20th century. And again, they're words that I suppose come from that era when the Industrial Revolution in the United States and the Wild West, with traveling fairs and traveling carnivals and traveling salespeople going town by town, maybe on the railway or along with these railway towns, and then they would set up shop, and they would basically bamboozle the town. And then as soon as they got the town to pay up, whatever it is that they were trying to do, they would pack up and they would ship off to the next town. And they would do this, going these traveling salesmen, or this expression, which I'm sure you're aware of, the snake oil salesman. That's another famous archetype or trope from the American West. The snake oil salesman, and they would roll into town, and they would set up shop in the town square with their little mobile um, wagon, their cart that they would open up, and it would be this this showpiece for them, this showcase, and they would do their song and dance, their dog and pony show. That's where this terminology comes from. And then when they felt that they had bamboozled and hoodwinked enough suckers in that town, and they had bled that town for as much as they could in this visit, then they would pack up shop in the middle of the night. They would skip town. And there is to a fraudster, a con artist, a salesperson, there's a thrill to that. Just like the hunter or the fisherman, there's a challenge of and roping, reeling somebody in, reeling in a big one, or hitting the mark. So it's more than just the financial gain. It's more than just the raw exploitation. There's that aspect. That's important to know. But that ultimately is not what we're here to talk about today. Because all of that is out there. All of that is individuals, organizations outside of you trying to take advantage of you, or individuals and organizations trying to take advantage of each other, and so on and so forth. That's fraud and scams and everything, again, as we all know and we're all familiar with, out there. And there's spam emails, right? There's email scams, telephone scams, mail fraud scams, you name it. They're never ending. But the image behind me suggests something far more insidious. Even though this is a separate individual, Q is supposedly outside of Picard. Nonetheless, he's whispering in his ear. What I'm proposing here today and proposing to you now is that the single most skillful, tactful, and deft, right? Clever, subtle, and insidious fraudster we've ever encountered is inside of ourselves. And that any scam or scammer that we encounter outside of ourselves is just another mirror and a reminder of who the real scammer is. The problem is that, as is so often the case, our ego loves pointing fingers, laying blame, and getting us to pay attention out there, pointing fingers at others, laying blame on others, judging others, saying, oh my goodness, that's terrible. How could they ever do that? Or that's a terrible, fraudster, and so on and so forth. Not realizing that such judgments are part of the fraud that we are at once victims of, but also complicit and guilty of. Because we cannot deny that we are what we are and we are who we are here and now in this moment. We cannot deny that we are these mortal vessels, even if we have a higher self and a consciousness and so on. We cannot deny that we are in some way, shape, or form identified and attached to our personalities and our mortal selves and the voices in our head, which are the equivalent of Q whispering in Jean-Luc Picard's ear, whispering his oh so clever and convincing arguments, trying to get Picard, right, the captain of the ship, to go along with and play his little game. You can't deny that you have such voices in your head. And 99 times out of 100, those voices present themselves as I. I want this and I don't want that. And whatever semblance of a human soul that we have, that's what's represented by Jean-Luc Picard here, responsible for our mortal vessel and has the free will to do with it as we will. But the desires, the cravings and aversions, and the voices in our head want to convince us and manipulate us to behave in certain ways. And so we have this scam, this ongoing fraud that we are all a part of. And to one degree or another, we are all complicit and guilty. We are all accessories to that confidence scam. Because we live every day, to one degree or another, fulfilling the will of one or more or multiple or many internal confidence artists. And you might think, well, this is this is ridiculous, or this is vague, or this is, or this is, you're just talking false self, true self, whatever. I know about my true self, and I know not to get attached to my false self, and so on and so forth. Yes, that's could be very true. But I wanted to spend some time today to introduce you to some experts or some gurus. And I wanted to introduce you to some very interesting language. Because I have certainly spoken at length about elimination of egos and union with the higher self and consciousness, and I've covered dozens, if not hundreds, of topics over the past 6 years on these live streams, and of course synthesized in many different ways and forms in my book and in some other videos and so on. But recently, this week, in fact, I was confronted with real world expressions that I had never come across before. And I needed to take an opportunity to share these with you, so as we all remain vigilant and appreciate just how clever and insidious and subtle and tactical the voices of this great fraud can be. Because as sure as we have voices in our head directing us and leading us away from the path, we may have voices in our head that we are convinced are us, our real self, our true self. Voices that tell us not to listen to the other voices. And voices that clearly direct us in the path of our desires and in the path of spirituality, in the path of our power, regaining our power and manifesting our desires and self-realizing, self-actualizing our true potential as human beings. And I wanted to take an opportunity to show you an example of gurus out there that are now using the language that these inner voices might use. So I'm going to just play this for you. You let me know if you can't hear the audio. You should be able to hear the audio, but I'm going to make this bigger. Okay, I'm just going to play this.
You will never think your way out of the ego's programs. You will never read your way out or perform your way out. But here's what actually works. Every self-help book, every motivational video, every New Year's resolution, almost all of these things are always aimed at our behaviors. Think positive, set better boundaries, wake up at 5 a.m., start a gratitude journal. Maybe you do these things and get a little bit of improvement, but the same triggers tend to keep setting you off. The same arguments, the same insecurities, and you just blame yourself for it.
So I'm just going to pause every now and then, because just not least to also avoid copyright. So you realize he's already on the attack. He's pointing out who the enemy is, the adversary is, egos. And he's also pointing out that there's a voice in your head that blames you for these behaviors that these egos make you do. So let's continue.
You think, I'm just not disciplined enough. I'm just not good enough. But the truth is, nothing is wrong with you. You've just been pulling leaves off of a tree, expecting it to die at the roots. And it's not going to do that. The roots are still intact. And so the tree of that belief will continue to live. But here's what does work. Every self in your mind, every identity has the exact same sequence: lack, attachment, control. No exceptions to this rule. And this is the Achilles heel of all selves in our mind. You can begin at the behavior pattern level of control and ask, what am I controlling right now? Based on that, what must I be attached to? And based on that attachment, what must I believe I'm lacking? And then you get to the root of the tree. For example, maybe you doom scroll every single night and you can't stop. So just begin to trace it. What am I controlling right now? I'm controlling my attention. I'm trying to feel pleasure so I don't have to feel the pain underneath it. So what's my attachment? Numbing out, disassociating, not feeling the pain inside. So then based on that attachment, what must I believe I'm lacking? And you sit with it for a moment and the answer comes.
So you see what he's doing, right? He has given you a formula, a step-by-step, clear way saying all of these selves, these identities, these egos inside of you, they all do the same thing the same way. So anytime you are in a behavior and you notice and you pay attention, you say, why am I doing this? I don't want to be doing this. Or this is not ideal behavior. This is not efficient or optimized behavior. Okay, I'm going to ask these questions and I'm just going to go through the motions here. Okay, and he says, just, you contemplate it, you answer these questions, and then he says the answer comes, and the answer is,
I believe I'm lacking purpose in my life. And because I don't want to feel this lack of purpose, I numb out by doom scrolling and Netflix binging. And so now for the last step, you're going to name that self, something that defines its lack belief, such as the meaningless self. Because when you do that, something powerful happens in your subconscious mind. The next time that program fires, a voice in your mind will say, aha, there's the meaningless self. And in that moment, you're no longer inside that program. You are watching it from a distance. Using muscle testing, you can verify all of these steps with your subconscious mind. You can calibrate your level of congruence with each self on a scale of 0 to 10. You can ask it if there's a blocked emotion to release and release it, and then retest. And slowly but surely, you watch that identity dissolve and disappear. And on April 18th, I'm going to be teaching a 4-hour live workshop of this exact protocol of how to identify and dissolve these mental identities and programs. It's called Muscle Test Manifestation. And I promise you, it's going to be one of the most life-changing things you will ever experience. So please come and join me on April 18th by commenting the word manifest down below, and I'll send you the link. You will.
Okay. So we have someone here who is claiming that all egos follow an exact same pattern, and that when we identify that we are in that pattern, we ask ourselves these questions, and that the final question we ask is, well, what am I lacking? And that based on this answer that supposed to come, what I'm lacking, then I give that self a name. In this particular case, he called it the meaningless self. And that in the future, that when those same behaviors or feelings come up, that the subconscious mind is going to report to me and say, oh, hey, here's the meaningless self. And that through, muscle testing and so on, and they'll say, well, what emotion do I have to release? And then it'll be released, and all this basically new age nonsense, mumbo jumbo, that this will somehow dissolve this self, this false identity that you have, quote, identified, because you've given it a name and you've identified with it. And that the next time it rears its ugly head, you'll say, oh, there it is, but you won't be attached to it anymore because now you'll be observing it, and that you can somehow dissolve it this way. Now, one of the keys here is what he calls the name of his program. What did he call it?
You will ever experience. So please come and join me on our
muscle
live work.
muscle
Identify
test
and
muscle test manifestation, or something like that. It's all still about manifesting your desires. You'll notice that there's no reference to the higher self. There's no reference to the true self. All of this is taking place in the mind. It's just giving the mind this ability to a more elaborate way of judging and labeling a so-called unwanted behavior. And this is a very, very elaborate bait and switch, but it's all taking place in the mind. Because this, and yeah, you got to sign up for his program, his course, and pay, how much money in order to learn all this, because it's behind a paywall and everything else. And that he is going to teach you how to manifest your desires and self-realize all the things that you want, which is what the New Agers always promise, and what the gurus always promise, to get what you want, to manifest what you want. Unlimited abundance, to reclaim your power. And he's saying here, well, you're going to reclaim your power from these selves that you're going to identify and name, and in some ways shame, but not because you're shaming yourself. You're blaming an other inside of you, which you've concocted, which you've named around a behavior. And yeah, he says in passing, I'm going to ask, are there any emotions connected to this that I have to release? But I don't know if I can effectively communicate how clever and insidious a distraction this is. If someone actually spends their time and energy doing this, how many egos do you think that they will comprehend and eliminate from themselves? The fear, the pride, the lust, the envy, the laziness, the gluttony. This, to me, is a more elaborate version of spiritual bypassing, by creating this construct, this story, this narrative, this pantomime that we're going to play out here through this formula. And then I'm going to name the thing, and then when it shows up, it's like I'm creating based on a behavior. I'm not actually getting at the actual defect or vice at the root of the behavior. What I'm doing is I'm creating a straw man version of that ego. And I'm going to focus all my attention on that straw man version of the ego, which allows that ego to continue unabated. And even if I can somehow manage to stop the behavior, I have not gotten rid of the ego. Because all my attention was focused and fixed on this named entity, this artificial entity that I attached to the behavior. It's like allopathic medicine focusing on symptoms. And he's like, eventually you can eliminate that self, but that self that you're eliminating is only a behavior. And you might say, yeah, but that's progress. Sure, that on some level you might say that's progress. But that's like saying, well, you know, I can cut out the tumor and that's progress. But if the underlying cancer hasn't been addressed, cutting out the tumor is, you know, there's going to be another tumor that shows up. The cancer is going to express itself in another way, in a different way, and possibly a far more insidious and subtle way. And the cancer might be metastasizing, and it might be spreading while I'm worried about, you know, having tumors removed. But the underlying cause, the cancer, is still spreading. And that's what allopathic healthcare is terrible at, because it's always looking at symptoms. And it says, well, if we can cure the symptom and make the person feel better, well, that's progress. But if the underlying condition is not addressed, then that's why we have so many people who have chronic illness and are on medications for the rest of their life. And this guy's methodology, yeah, he's basically signing up people who are going to be buying courses and buying books and buying CDs and buying everything that he has to sell them on an ongoing basis for the rest of their lives, because he's not actually going to be helping anybody. He might be helping them feel better and helping them eliminate, quote, bad behaviors, and maybe even helping them manifest their desires. But again, here is where this gets even worse, which is where the scam really kicks in. So I want to play you something else. And I want to play you something else, because these voices and the voices in our head, what the voices in our head can come up with. Let's listen to this.
Hi, I'm Maya Bialik.
And I'm Jonathan Cohen.
And welcome to part 2 of our conversation with Lee Harris, a globally recognized spiritual teacher, intuitive, and best-selling author. We've had him on the breakdown before, but this time he is channeling the Z's, the spiritual guides who have literally guided his whole life for the past several decades. We get to ask him all the hard questions that we've been waiting to ask. In part 1 of our conversation, we focused on understanding what channeling is and what the Z's can provide us in terms of demonic forces, the Earth's resources, and the possibility of World War III that so many of us want to know more about. In part 2 of our conversation, we're going to tackle the consciousness of humanity, why the system that seems to be crumbling overnight has to go slower than we might expect, and how the next 5 years will show us the rise of humanity, including the emergence of us as light warriors.
We also talk about...
Just going to pause there just for a moment. Did you catch that? That this fellow Lee Harris, he's channeling. He's going to be channeling these entities called Z. All right, and so while he's channeling, he's going to be enlightening us on all of these questions and topics. And so let's continue here.
About how to develop your intuition, understanding what is guidance versus fear, and how to navigate your life from a more intuitive place.
We hope you enjoy part 2 of our conversation with Lee Harris.
Break it down.
If the Epstein files are a smokescreen to distract us, what should we be focusing on?
Well, we would say that is fairly clear, meaning, and we understand, we do not mean to be obtuse or play a game with you. You are in a period of history where you are beginning to see human rights eroded, taken away. That is the goal. That is the attempt and the intent. But, and this is very important, pay attention to the grassroots movements in the areas that have been most struck, the amount of people saying no, and the way they are figuring out how to say no.
Okay. Did you catch what he just said there? And if you think you did or might have, what did he say? Let's listen again. Remember, this is someone who's channeling an entity or entities. He's using the first person plural. He's saying we, the way I used to say we all the time when I was referring to myself and my higher self. But he is channeling now, which means that whatever is using him as a medium is referring to itself as we. And listen to these words
The
again.
goal, that is the...
Okay.
What should we be focusing on?
Well, we would say that is fairly clear, meaning, and we understand, we do not mean to be obtuse or play a game with you. You are...
They say, we do not mean to be obtuse or play a game with you. Well, we don't mean to do that. We just are doing that. Remember that this is a game. Okay? These entities that engage in this kind of practice, choosing naive mediums and then having those naive mediums become their useful idiots to go on podcasts like this one and take advantage of naive hosts and their naive audience. It's a game. And this is why I spent the half an hour, 40 minutes at the beginning. You have to be able to put yourself in the mind, in the head of someone who does hoaxes and scams and a con artist who does it for the thrill of it, for the enjoyment of it, and not just the gain of it from it. But listen carefully.
Are in a period of history where you are beginning to see human rights eroded, taken away. That is the goal. That is the attempt and the intent. But...
Okay. You are living in a time of history when you are beginning to see human rights being eroded, being taken away. That is the goal. That is the intent. Whose goal? Intent by who? Whose intention is it? Who has set this goal? Doesn't say. Why not? Because he is going to allow you to fill in the blanks and say, well, of course, it's the global elite. It's the men behind the curtain. It must be Epstein and the Epstein crowd. You filled that in. He didn't tell you that. He's not lying. It's just that it's not the goal and the intent of people out there. It's their intent. Z, whatever Z is, the malevolent entities, the demonic forces who call themselves Z, channeling through this useful idiot, have just told you. But they didn't say it's our goal. No, it's the goal. We're just vague. And by keeping it vague, we let you fill in who the bad guy is. But this lovely, well-spoken, kindly, smiling British fellow that we've chosen to be our useful idiot, well, you're not going to think he's the adversary. And because, well, we can continue here. We can continue because we're here helping you. We're here giving you all this knowledge. We're giving you all these secret answers from beyond the curtain, from the other side. Well, I mean, obviously, we're here to help you. So let's just keep listening.
And this is very important. Pay attention to the grassroots movements in the areas that have been most struck. The amount of people saying no, and the way they are figuring out how to say no. We have said for many years, this is a revolutionary time on Earth, but it won't always look like old style revolutions, because you are in a very different time in history, and energy is different and technology is different. But you are at a time on Earth where, as we will call it, internal control starts to crumble more and more, which it will over the coming years, you as people are going to have to fill in the gaps where your system leaves a gap. So, for example, as certain systems become more destabilized, you, the people, are going to have to figure out how to make it work for and by and with yourselves. So we are not implying that whole parts of your infrastructure will disappear overnight, for that would not serve anyone. You have to remember that the goal is to keep you here, but not necessarily with the freedom that you are used to.
All right. Did you catch that last part? The goal is to keep you here, but not necessarily with the freedom that you're used to. He just said there's going to be this revolution. It's not going to be overnight, but as these systems start failing you, you're going to have to step in, and you're going to have to rely on yourselves to fill in the gaps and fill in the blanks, because the goal is to keep you here, but not with the freedom that you've been used to. Now, when you consider for a moment the downfall of civilizations and the downfall of past humanities, that all Aboriginal peoples are former members of high civilizations. They are the people who, quote, gave themselves back to nature. Because the planet, mechanical nature, needs a humanity. It needs hominids around. But it needs hominids living according to their mechanical nature, to their primal instincts. And what he just said there, the goal is to keep you around, but not with the same freedoms as you're normally used to. And when you go to any Aboriginal people anywhere in the world, obviously, mechanical nature is keeping them around, but they don't have the same freedoms as you and I do to travel the world in an airplane or to get information from around the world via satellite, via the internet, and to have access to, all sorts of book learning and book knowledge, and they don't have access to the teachings and whatever consciousness that they expand upon. They rely on psychedelics and trance and the drum and the dance, and it's a very contained, and it's contained specifically in the fifth dimension and down, the lunar fifth dimension, to be clear, because they are constrained by mechanical nature and their primal animal instincts. And they are on that devolutionary spiral. The great apes were all once members of a humanity. And he says it explicitly here, but he says it in a way that allows the listener to project that on an other, on somebody outside, on the global elite, or some other person behind the curtain, some other, secret cabal that's trying to control and exploit humanity. So there's one, and you might be asking yourself, what would be the point of him speaking the truth? Why would this entity or entities who are being channeled here, why would they blatantly say the quiet part out loud so explicitly, keeping in mind that there are key omissions here, right? That allow you to fill in the blanks so that you think the best of him. And even though the message is a message of danger, it's a message of warning, it's directing you and your fear and your awareness against some external other and away from the actual true perpetrators of this plot that he's describing, whose plan is to keep you around, but reduce your freedoms and liberties, to contain you. Why would he say the quiet part out loud? Why is that important? And it's important because all scams, all frauds, all fraudsters and con artists and scammers and black magicians, and propagandists and false teachings speak snippets of truth or chunks of truth. The most dangerous teachings are the ones that are 90% true, because he speaks so much truth, the naive listener is going to resonate with the truth part. And if somebody is talking to you and 90% of what they say to you is bang on and it's upfront and open, he's not hiding anything. There's no energy of hiding. There's no camouflage. The word is subterfuge. Because subterfuge, if you are very sensitive, if you are very aware, if you're very empathic, you can pick that up when someone's holding back, when someone's hiding something from you. So the more they can be completely open and the more they show you, what they don't show you becomes smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller. Whatever subterfuge there may be becomes negligible in comparison to the truth that they're sharing. And your consciousness and your positivity and you focus on, oh yeah, you focus on, and you as an individual, as a mortal, as a vessel, what's resonating with you as true, you focus on that. And you say, wow, I'm really resonating with what this guy's saying. It must be the truth. This is how all confidence artists work. They win you over, right? Because the more you resonate with what they say, the more confident you become that they are telling you the truth. But this, my friends, is classic textbook doublespeak. Okay? Doublespeak is a black magic spell. It's the only way we can call it, because language is magical. That's why we call it spelling. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. Right? Abracadabra. Right? As I speak, I create, or I create what I speak. Abracadabra. What he's saying here is classic doublespeak. It's 100% true on in and of itself. But how you fill in the blank makes it subjectively true for you, while what is withheld that makes it objectively the opposite of what you think is withheld. So it's objectively true, which means however you subjectively interpret it will feel as though it's objectively true, because there is nothing to counterbalance it. It's doublespeak. It means two things at the same time, precisely opposite things, so that you can believe what's on the face of it, while the exact opposite is true. This is doublespeak. And here he's making it sound like he is the messenger warning you of the era that you're in, and he's actually doing this to get you off the scent of what what mechanical nature is exactly planning for humanity. Let's continue on.
Now, that's the goal that is playing out right now. That is not the spiritual truth of Earth. That is the agenda of a dominating force who you are now in a reckoning with, because they are more exposed than they have ever been. So this...
Okay. Again, right? That is not the spiritual truth of the earth. That is the truth of a dominating force that you now have to have a reckoning with, because it's never been so exposed. Why? What is this dominant force that is not the earth's spiritual truth? The earth's spiritual truth is divine nature, is the White Lodge. It's the monads. That's the spiritual truth of the earth. But the dominant force is mechanical nature. And it's never been so exposed, because we are in the Iron Age of this humanity. We are in the Kali Yuga, and in the Kali Yuga, the Black Lodge rules. Look around you. Materialism, empiricism, mechanicity, technology. Do these forces not rule humanity? What about capitalism and economics in general? What about the rise of communism, right? And wokeness, which you said, you talked about the grassroots movements. Look closely at the grassroots movements, like wokeness, because those are people who are connecting into mechanicity, and that they're driving forth in a sort of revolutionary way, believing that they're actually revolting against the spiritual truth of the earth. Like, he's speaking the truth, but he's doing it in such an obtuse way that you can fill in the blanks and you can project it on others and avoid the reality, because it's doublespeak is, to put it another way, doublespeak is lies by omission. I'm going to back up so you can hear that again.
To keep you here, but not necessarily with the freedom that you are used to. Now, that's the goal that is playing out right now. That is not the spiritual truth of Earth. That is the agenda of a dominating force who you are now in a reckoning with, because they are more exposed than they have ever been. So this is where you have to zoom out a little. You, as human beings who are programmed to follow exactly what is playing out on Earth right now, you believe, we are trapped, because our powers that be might not have our best interests at heart, and we don't know how to get out of it. And we say, no, you are souls who were born unto the earth at this time to be part of the change of power system on Earth that has always been corrupt, but now you can see it. Now you can feel it. Now you have tools, wherewithal, and know-how to tackle it. This is why your own personal empowerment is so important at these times. That is why we said to you, Jonathan, you feeling sadness, even though that's not comfortable for you, it's not desired, it's good. Feel the sadness, feel the grief, feel the anger, feel the rage, feel the devastation. Those feelings won't last, because your will to live and your will to build a new world will kick in. That is what you are all here doing. So yes, we are having a very sobering conversation, perhaps, about areas of the planet that are quite difficult to navigate right now. But what you also have to remember is the amount of angelic and energetic support that is now gathering around this planet. We have.
Okay, so I'm just going to pause what he's getting at now with the angelic support and everything else, because that, again, he's going to be speaking truth here, okay? But notice what he said. Feel the grief, feel the sadness, feel the anger, feel that they won't last, because your will to live, and your will to build and rebuild and build something new, okay? It's going to be built on the foundation of these old systems that have been corrupted and everything else, but it's the sadness and the frustration and the anger and your will to live, right? Not your willpower to be, not to liberate yourself from the shackles of mechanical nature, not to be chosen to be a seed for the next humanity. No. For you and your will to live, the survival instinct, the primal animal survival instinct to live and to build. That is what he wants you to focus on. You, your I, the I that wants to live, survive. And the primal, how many times have we talked about fear on this podcast? And how many times have we described fear as the primal survival instinct? Fear of death, your will to live. Now he's going to talk about angelic forces and so on and so forth. And he's not lying, right? Remember, the purpose of everything that he's saying is to speak as much truth as he can, leaving out those key omissions that allow this truth to become doublespeak and have dual meanings, and that it can be framed in such a way that he's associating this fact over here with this fact over there by eliminating the middle piece, so that you naturally assume that that truth and that truth go together. It's like if you took a song and you cut out this verse and that verse and the chorus, and then you truncated the song, and then you read it, or you read the poem, or you read the speech, or you read the truncated version with all these omissions made. You could completely change the meaning, or you could make the meaning completely ambiguous, or you could make the meaning such that enough of the truth was there, but that the reader now filling in these blanks would misinterpret or misapply the meaning to something else. That's doublespeak.
Right now. But what you also have to remember is the amount of angelic and energetic support that is now gathering around this planet. We have said this for many years. You are getting help, and we will call it interference for.
Okay? For many years, we have been saying, you are getting help. Energetic and spiritual beings, you are getting help. And we will call this interference. Just for a moment, right? Everything that I've shared with you so far of what he's saying in the doublespeak, and he's saying what the plan is for you humans. We're going to keep you around, but you're going to lose you're not going to have the same freedoms. You're going to be, and we want you to focus on your primal animal instincts. In other words, forget all this civilization shit. You're going back to the jungle, man, and you're going to live like animals again. because that's what mechanical nature, that's what we want you to do, is live like animals and behave like animals, because that's what mechanical nature, and that's what the Black Lodge needs hominids to do. That's why we constantly are getting you guys to slaughter each other in the streets, even in the big cities, right? With drugs and gangs and everything else. And that's why we have brothels and we have pornography and we have all this other shit, because the Black Lodge, we're constantly trying to get you guys to behave like animals. Well, now the push is really on, because we're breaking down all of these systems. And as all these systems collapse, we want to keep you guys around, but we want to strip away some of those freedoms. And you're going to be living in a contained thing. And we want you to feel your sadness, feel the loss, feel the anger, feel the frustration, but it won't last, because you're going to build something new. And what you're going to build is going to be based on your primal animal survival instinct. Now there's these angelic beings hanging around, and spiritual beings. We'll call them resistance. Resistance to our plan for you, which is to make you and turn you into animals again, to destroy humanity, to destroy the global civilization and turn you into savage hominids again. That's our plan. But the angelic beings, the spirits, they're here to help you. So we are going to call that resistance. Because don't you think that the divine beings are trying to help you resist the urge to behave like an animal, to give into your animal primal instincts, to give into your egos? Double speak. Double speak.
Yes, we are having a very sobering conversation, perhaps, about areas of the planet that are quite difficult to navigate right now. But what you also have to remember is the amount of angelic and energetic support that is now gathering around this planet. We have said this for many years. You are getting help, and we will call it interference, for some of those lower agendas all of the time. You just will never hear about that on your mainstream news. That is why this kind of programming conversation is very important.
So I apologize. It wasn't resisting, it was interference was the word that he used. Okay. So, and he said that interference against these low level entities. And he's like, but you're never going to hear about this on the news. That's why programs like this one are so important, because the mainstream news, the mainstream media are not going to let me go on there and channel and use this useful idiot and speak directly to you with all this black magic doublespeak.
This is the resistance. And we don't like using that term because it pulls you back into a us-them paradigm. The truth is, all of you are going to die at some point. That's inevitable. You will either die of old age or you will die earlier. So death is going to happen. You are...
He's describing the Kali Yuga.
Often caught by your fear of death. Your fear of death is one of the ways they catch you. Well, you're all going to die. The question is, are you going to live? And how do you want to live? And do you want to live in a world that is more free for all? And this is very important. We now have to say this. The consciousness of humanity has developed to such a degree that no longer are you needing the old form of the system. You've outgrown it. So you think they're trying to enslave you because they are trying to quickly trap you all before you will get too powerful. No, it's already happened. It's already happened. That is why they are trying to clamp down now. You have already gone beyond human consciousness in recent decades and centuries. So there are more of you on the planet now who are more, we will call it, tapped in. You may not yet have figured out how to bring it to the system of the world. But what we can tell you is this, because we understand the need for a hero or a savior. And we are not telling you a bedtime story when we say this. And we also don't want you to rely on the idea that someone's going to come in and scoop you up at the last minute and save you. But you are, in the coming years, going to see of more awareness of your galactic origins, that Earth is a part of galactic, not just humanity, but galactic consciousness and the galactic tribe. And there are those who have already been on your planet for a very long time, who are going to come to the surface a little more. Part of the problem is it is the old story that you believe in that keeps you in the story. More and more of you aren't believing the story anymore. And once you don't believe the story, your energy field can't be a vibrational match for it, which means you can't recreate the story. That's why so many right now are rushing to try and gain control.
It's amazing.
So this one is subtle, but it has to do with the old stories that you are no longer vibing with because your consciousness has moved past those other humanities. But the thing is that you got to look at these in relative terms. And he says that's why, and he said, and when he gets to more and more people are rushing for control. And this is again doublespeak. It's an inversion. You can listen to this and hear everything you want to hear that validates all the new age things and and makes us all sound like it's all wonderful. But if you listen with your consciousness and you listen to saying, okay, this is doublespeak, meaning it's got two meanings. It's got a meaning, on a subjective meaning on the surface, if I take it a certain way, but if I listen to it objectively, could very easily, even though he's speaking truth about other beings and the cosmos and a quote galactic tribe, right? So again, he's using the truth to smooth over and to lubricate, right? To in order to be able to pass through and slip through the dark and sinister truths of what he's really saying. So let's continue here. We're not certainly not going to go through this entire hour-long interview. You can spend more time if you want. It was really hang on a second. Benjamin has a comment here, so why don't we get to that first? He says, I've noticed that nowadays, like in the video samples you've shown us, there are many black magicians who appear to reveal their method before carrying out their nefarious plans. I think this reflects an inversion of God warning people through prophets before passing judgment. Hence, Jesus warns us that in the last days, there will be false prophets. Well, that's kind of exactly what we're dealing with here, right? And he says, surely the Lord does nothing unless he reveals his secret to his servants, the prophets. But so in that sense, what you're saying is, if I'm understanding you correctly, the fact that he is speaking truth of what is to come, right? He is speaking prophetic words, but because of omission and because of the doublespeak, there's still false words, right? That makes him a false prophet. And 100%, I can go along with that interpretation, Benjamin, because that's really what he is. I mean, he sells himself as being a kind of prophet, this Lee Harris guy. And no doubt he agreed to these entities, this Z, to be their medium and to be their channeler, because they probably sold him on the idea that humanity, you're going to be a prophet, you're going to be our mouthpiece, and that humanity is going to love you for it, because you're going to be spreading this important information, these important truths, which is what real prophets do, right? But you're right, he's a false prophet. And in that sense, it's clear, and it's actually, when you think about it in those terms, you can understand why they use that language in the Bible, because the most revered individuals in the world at that time were the prophets, right? The prophet Isaiah, right? And Jesus was a great prophet, and it was the prophets that were revered the most. So, and I'm not sure if they had messianic figures, but I don't know if they had false messiahs, or like, I don't know how prevalent spiritual grifting was back in Jesus's day. They must have had false prophets even in his day, people pretending to be great prophets. And so the fact that that is the term that's used in the Bible, because that is how the spiritual grifter would have appeared back in the day, and that is how the people would have understood them as a false prophet. We understand them as different things. We don't even use the word prophet nowadays. But we can make the connection, as you just did, Benjamin, between the the new age guru or the self-help guru and the false prophet. So that's a good observation there. I wonder if it's worthwhile.
I want to put some detail, a little flesh on the bone of what you were talking about, as I understand it, to see if I'm tracking right before moving into the empowerment, because it feels like that's where this conversation is going. But when you talk about clamping down control and that the systems are breaking down, it feels like we have to rebuild so that we can avoid control. For example, avoid everyone being monitored all the time, the new technological tools being used to control the movement of people, the not spying necessarily, but tracking every piece of information, the fact that our power is centralized and media is centralized, all the systems are becoming so centralized that they then have a monopoly and they can't be challenged in any way. So it feels like there needs to be new startups, the use of this technology in order to create and ensure safety, security, privacy, the ability to move, think, share ideas, so that they can't be censored.
Yes, 10 to 15 years ago, we gave a message multiple times because it needed to be given, that those of you who are saying we wish the system would fall down overnight and we could rebuild something else, we said, oh no, you do not want that at all. That is not the way to go here. That would be devastation and chaos. And we said, it will all play out over a much slower timeline so that you can make adjustments as you go. Yes, innovation is very important. It is why we have given Lee the pieces of information that he delivers every month in his energy updates on YouTube, that there is a growing force of individuals that you may not even know about, who are already building the new world. They are already building what is going to be needed for humanity in the coming years. And it is not one way, because it is going to vary from country to country, and it is going to vary from region to region. The centralization is what you want to avoid, but we are not too fond of predictions because timelines can change. But we will tell you that globalization in the way it is desired is not going to synthesize or synchronize, because those egos of the individuals involved who think they can all team up to pull this off together, they are going to implode on each other. They are going to destroy each other. You are in the middle of watching that play out now. So the power hungry are having less places to hide. And the vibration of power hunger, it would be far better, we will say this, even though we do not mean this is what's going to happen, it would be far better if you all just died, if that was going to play out. Because not
This is directly addresses one of the figures that I put in my book, showing dividing and conquering humanity, and I showed the two pillars, and that one of those pillars is going to lead to destruction, and the other pillar is leading to devolution. And what he's describing here is those two pillars. He's saying that you don't want it all to collapse all at once, because that's chaos and this and that. You want it to slowly devolve and degenerate so you can adapt and evolve with it. In other words, so you can devolve. And that you don't want this centralized thing. That means it's going to be in different, he said it's going to be different in different places. Well, that's once again breaking apart and going back to regionalism and eventually tribalism, because that's where that devolution is headed, right? There was no such thing as the First Nations people of America, right? That's a myth. That's a woke modern myth, right? They were all separate nations. All of those different disparate tribes and peoples across North America were separate, and very often they were warring with each other, right? So this idea that there was somehow some kind of united First Nations is a very specious idea. But on the other hand, he says, now, if the globalists were to succeed and they were to create this centralized thing, I mean, you'd be better off dead. And that's really what's going to happen. That's basically what he's saying is going to happen, because there are forces that are looking to continue to globalize the New World Order movement, in other words. And yes, they are eating each other up, and the thing will implode on itself. And everybody's a part of that, and under that umbrella are going to be wiped off the face of the earth, and they are all going to die. Like he said at the beginning, you're all going to die. So, but there's also going to be this other faction, right? Because we want to keep part of you around, but we want to limit the freedom of those parts. Well, those going to be those people who are going back off into breaking up into tribal factions and so on and so forth. So he's describing, things that I talked about in my book. Only the way he's describing it, actually, this entity is describing it through him, is this doublespeak, painting this picture that is far too easy to interpret the way that he's saying what you want to hear. But he's actually saying something quite different than how it's coming across. And Benjamin says, yes, there are a lot of false prophets, even in olden times, like the prophets of Baal, whom the God's prophets challenged. Okay. I don't think there's any point in belaboring the point here and continuing on with this interview. What I can do is share with you. I'm just cutting and pasting here, which is why you're hearing all these clicks and pops and so on. Why don't I put this on the screen? This is the title of that video, okay? Fear is their weapon, why the next 5 years will transform humanity. And here is the link. Now, I have a question. Do you guys see the chat in the Oh, sorry, here. Is the chat showing up in a window here? Because it is for me, and I'm just curious to know if it is for you. But anyway, there's a link to the video. You can go and watch that. Oh, Benjamin says, yeah, we can see it. Okay. So then you can see you got the links there and you have the title to the video. If you want, it's an hour long. That's Dr. Maim. If she seems familiar to you, that's because she was on The Big Bang Theory. And years ago, she was on, and I mean many, many years ago, like what, 20 years, 30 years ago, she was on a program called Blossom. That's Blossom. Yeah, and then she was Amy on The Big Bang Theory. And this is her podcast, and I'm assuming that's her partner, the gentleman with the beard. So you can, it's only an hour long. You can watch the rest of it on your own time. But put yourself in a meditative state and watch it with your consciousness. Listen with your consciousness and pay close attention to the doublespeak. This is an entity who is momentarily possessing this fellow, Lee Harris. Now, I don't have to tell you, or maybe I just ask, right? What sorts of entities are in the business of possession? What sorts of entities are in the business of possessing humans for some gain? And does this sound like the activity of angels or ascended masters? Right? And Benjamin has the right answer. As I have said many times, if a master, an ascended master, an archangel, a cosmo creator, wants to send a message to humanity, they reincarnate. They take on a human body. They are born as an infant, as a child. They suffer. They sacrifice. And they fulfill their work for the sake of suffering humanity as one of us, as a real prophet, a bona fide prophet. Or as an artist, as a musician, as a physician, as a whatever is going to serve their purpose for the sake of suffering humanity. However, whatever it is that they wish to deliver, however it is that they wish to help humanity, they will do so by becoming one of us and coming down. And the proof of this is history. How many prophets have there been? How many saints? How many martyrs? How many great poets and literary masters and musical masters and Renaissance masters and stonemasons and on and on and on it goes. That there have been incredible beings that have lived, incredible human beings that have performed incredible feats in life, and that clearly they were being motivated by some higher force, some higher power. That God was working through them. But that individuated essence of God, their higher self, their innermost being, chose to come here and live a life of suffering and sacrifice and perform some great life work. And if all that is true, and if Jesus came and performed the cosmic drama that he did, that we talked about 2 weeks ago and 3 weeks ago, about Easter, the Holy Week, etc., on Good Friday. And Master Abbottamento came and lived the life as Jesus of Nazareth, and fulfilled that duty. And not only that, after Good Friday, descended into hell to free souls trapped in hell. This is the work of divinity. This is what divine beings do. I'm sorry. They don't fax down instructions through useful idiots. They don't sit in their ivory tower in the clouds, in the supernal worlds, wringing their hands and choosing people to be mediums and mouthpieces for them. No, they roll up their sleeves and they come down here, right down into like on the ground floor, right down into the basement. Benjamin says, I agree with your statement that true prophets were born and become one of us. Quote, before I formed you in the womb, I knew you. Before you were born, I set you apart. I appointed you as a prophet to the nations. It's from the book of Jeremiah. And Benjamin also says, the word became flesh and dwelt among us, the Gospel of John. Yeah, exactly. Exactly. And not only because that's the right thing to do, because that is an act of selflessness. Where is the selflessness in this channeling? In this act of channeling? Where is the selflessness? Where is the sacrifice? Is it a sacrifice that this fellow, this Lee fellow, is allowing himself to be possessed? Is that a sacrifice? He would never be on this podcast. He would never be on this podcast were he not channeling. In other words, he sold his soul for fame and to be important and to feel like he's doing something important for humanity. But of course, this is, after all, what we're here to talk about today. I chose these examples to show you how externally the forces of the Black Lodge, how cunning and how clever and how manipulative and how insidious they can be. And what doublespeak is. So you could hear it and experience it, but hear it for yourself. When somebody says, but you know, there are many angels and spiritual beings here now helping you, and we will call them interference. And the way they present it, right? It's like they're speaking the truth. but the context in which they're saying it, you believe that they're on your side, the Z, and they're on the side of the angels. But that's doublespeak, because they said explicitly, we will call them interference. Because the angels and spiritual beings are interfering with the work and the plans and the intentions of mechanical nature, of the Black Lodge, which Z is representing, which Z is a part of. They have to be, because only the Black Lodge does possession, only the Black Lodge does channeling. And all of this misinformation and this disinformation, this 90% true doublespeak, is here to mislead humanity and make people feel spiritual, make people feel important. And yes, the next part of this interview gets into the empowerment stuff and making people feel empowered and in control of their destiny. But remember, it's all in the context of your will to live. So how will you live? You're all going to die. He said that, well, you're all going to die, but how will you live? Well, you live empowered. Well, what's being fed there? Who wants power? When you know yourself, when you observe yourself, when you meditate, what is it inside of you that desires power and more power and greater power? Does that seem like something that your innermost intimate Christ longs for? Is power? And if he is an individuated essence of the Christ, wouldn't you think that he has access to all the power he needs? So who or what then inside of us craves power? The power to control our lives, this will to live that we have. So when you look at all of this longevity medicine happening around the world and people obsessed with longevity, it's their will to live. And he even talked about fear of death. The key here, and the reason why I chose these two useful idiots of the Black Lodge, spreading their erroneous teachings, is because the voices in our head are as clever and as insidious. They're whispering in our ear like Q whispering in Captain Picard's ear. And they're whispering, yeah, you can have more power. You can have whatever you want. You can live in unlimited abundance. You can attract whatever it is you want into your life. And you don't have to live like this. You can, and do positive thinking and the grift is the ultimate grift is a spiritual one, meaning it's a twisted, appropriated spirituality where the voices in our head, our egos, appropriate and assign our longing to be free from this hell and return home and be in the supernal worlds. the ego wants to capture that longing and condition it and filter it and wrap itself around the longing for self. There is nothing that a demon relishes more than convincing you that A, it is on your side, and that B, it is who you truly are. It is your higher self, or it is some angel or spiritual being, spiritual entity, which is exactly how this fellow fell into becoming a useful idiot for some demon. Because rest assured, this Z character or this council of Z or the whatever these entities are that are channeling through him, they came to him in a dream, on the astral plane, or in a vision. In some capacity, they appeared to him as resplendent beings of light. And so convincing was their performance, and so convincing were their words, or better said, so charming were their words. Right? That's where the word charming comes from. To charm. As in Lucky Charms. Well, charm is a synonym for spell. A charm is like when someone charms you, if someone puts charms you, it's like they're casting a spell on you. So it's very similar to when a vampire seduces a virgin, a young and pure and innocent young woman. But the vampire seduces her. He uses all of his charms, all of his magic to influence her and seduce her and get her to willingly submit to his desire. And that's exactly what an entity does when it charms someone and gets them to submit willingly to become their medium and to practice spiritism, to allow themselves to become possessed in order so that they can be the mouthpiece for these malevolent entities pretending to be whatever they're pretending to be. But we mustn't be naive. I do not have a window into your soul. I do not have an audio feed whereby I can hear the voices in your head. I do not know all of the ways that the various voices in your head present themselves, the roles that they take or purport to take, and how they go about having their way with you and getting you to do their will. Nobody can know that but you. You can know that. Just know that it is happening. and that you are being bamboozled. And that if you doubt it, I hope that being able to witness how black magicians and demons, how clever and insidious they can be, and I hope that exposing you to some doublespeak allows you to, gives you some insight and a broader lens through which to listen to the voices in your head. Because one of the, I'll give you an example, another example. One of the most common ways that our egos appropriate the spiritual path again, they are machines, they are mechanical entities, which means they only come to life when energy moves through them and when consciousness perceives them. Now, in the realm of the subconscious mind, they're always active because the subconscious mind is always active. But that is a lower form of consciousness. What they want is not, they want to escape the subconscious and come up to the conscious realm and manipulate on that level. But like a film in a projector, it needs the light shining through it in order to be on the screen and project its story onto the screen. So, and the nature of that story is always a conditioning of that light. That's what film does. It takes pure white light and it conditions it in some way to tell a story. And that story on the movie screen, its intention, its hope is that it's hypnotic, that it grabs our attention and it holds our attention. It fixes our attention on the screen. That's what the film in the projector is for. And that's the only way that the film can come alive, that it's set in motion through that projector so that light shines through it onto a screen and then it fixes our attention on it. And the allegory of Plato's cave and all that stuff. But when you recognize that all of this is happening inside of our own mind, and that intuition is truth and experience is truth, the raw, pure experience, the conscious knowledge of an experience is the pure white light, the objective truth. The mind loves to wrap a story around that experience, an interpretation of the experience, and it leaps to conclusions based on the experience. And because the experience is true, we had it, we experienced it, we have a tendency to buy into the story that our mind is telling us about the experience, because that story is wrapped around the experience, and the experience is wrapped up in these ideas and concepts and interpretations and conclusions. And spiritual experience is so precious to us. They are so rare and meaningful and impactful. And the longing in our heart, like objective truth, the things we know are so precious to us. Knowledge is power. Well, that's why the egos want it, and they want to appropriate it, make it their own. And how do they make it their own? Well, they wrap themselves around it. So that now that experience becomes owned by the I. It's my experience. It's my truth. Someone today posted something in a comment to something I wrote, and they said that Gnosis is all about people experimenting with different forms of perception, and that all of these different parallel forms of perception eventually intersect and meet in truth, in the truth. And I had to reply to them and ask them, tell me, what are all these different forms of perception that you speak of, that we are meant to experiment with? Because last time I checked, there's only one way to perceive, right? That's consciousness. And that there are myriad forms of conditioned consciousness, but they're all conditioned, they're all subjective. There are myriad forms of subjective consciousness, but we call them sleeping consciousness. So tell me, what are all these forms of perceptions that are all parallel and they're all going to arrive at the truth, versus these subjective forms of perception, these subjective forms of consciousness that are in no ways parallel and are divergent and taking us away from the truth? This is something that I run into over and over and over again, where I have to preface something I say by pointing out the underlying intuitive foundation of what that person believes. But then I have to point out how their rational ego mind has painted a story, a narrative on top of that foundation. And they believe that their narrative is true because the underlying foundation, that underlying intuition, is true. But the intuition referred to something completely different and has no bearing on the story that is now utilizing, that is now misappropriating and exploiting the intuition that it wrapped itself around. That's the grift. Like, that is mystic pride. We have an experience, and then before we know it, we have voices in our head painting narratives of delusions of grandeur. Oh, and I must be the reincarnation of this master and that master, and I must have done this and I must have done that, and I must be like this and I must be like that. I must be awake and I must be enlightened. I must be ascended, because they had an experience. It happens to everybody. If you have an experience, spiritual experience, and then you observe your mind is just jumping and grabbing at straws, and it's like it's all of these entities, these selves, these egos, desperately clamoring and fighting over who's going to get to define subjectively the nature of this objective experience. Who gets to exploit it? Who gets to ride the coattails of that particular experience? But the greatest grift is the notion that you and I get to ascend, that you and I get to go to heaven. No, we don't. And I use the analogy of the video game for the very reason that it's clear and obvious that Mario doesn't get to leave the Nintendo game. Mario cannot leave Super Mario World. And Link doesn't get to leave The Legend of Zelda. And you and I do not get to leave this physical reality, this body and this personality that we have. Ashes to ashes, dust to dust. We belong to mechanical nature. Mechanical Mother Nature is going to take back what's hers. But that which does not belong to mechanical Mother Nature, our monad, our innermost, our true self, our consciousness, and our experiential knowledge, the wisdom, the learning that we developed by being here in this body, in this personality, in this character, and playing this character, this role in this MMORPG called life, right? The knowledge, the wisdom, the learning, the experience, the consciousness that belongs to our player, our innermost, goes with him, our player, into the supernal worlds. But we, the character and the personality, we remain here, and we slowly get degenerated and or get deleted, get dissolved. Or we fall and we become trapped and we become recycled and used and exploited in different ways by the mechanical game world. Because this mortal self belongs to mechanical nature. And the grift is the worst bamboozling is the one that takes and twists and manipulates and corrupts the deep longing of the conscience and the intuitive knowing that we're here on a spiritual path, a spiritual journey. The biggest grift is the one that wraps itself around that intuition and interferes with it. Because it sees and it resists it, not overtly, but subtly and insidiously, because it knows that it is more effective, but it's also more fun, and it's more of a challenge, and it's more fun, but it's also more effective to someone who's conscious to win their confidence, right? It's a grift, it's a scam, to hoodwink, to bamboozle. It's like the Joker needs Batman, because a Joker is just having his way with everybody else. Only Batman represents a real challenge to the Joker, in the same way that only the Joker represents a real challenge to Batman. But we cannot afford to be naive. We cannot afford to have a very superficial or oversimplified view of what mechanical nature is, what it does, how it behaves. And we cannot underestimate the adversary. And that the con artist, the con job, the bamboozling that takes place within our own psychology, we mustn't allow ourselves to be continually caught up in that and taken advantage, because it's so charming and it's so insidious, and it's so, what it has to tell us is so validating or tempting, or telling us what we want to hear, right? So we have to be mindful and be aware of the doublespeak taking place within our own psychology. Because at every turn, our path, our adversary is trying to appropriate that path and wrap itself around and get between and run interference between ourself and our higher self. It wants to condition that light. And whatever truths are coming through, it wants to wrap its own narrative and own story around those truths, or intercept those truths and then by omission leave bits and pieces out. And then we end up in that doublespeak scenario like we were looking at earlier. So if we want to summarize, the key, as is so often the case, is humility. And it's surrender, but surrender not to the voices in your head, but the still soft voice. And to let go and to pay attention to the mechanical forces of mystic pride and fear and laziness and all the rest of it, but in their most clever and insidious forms. And to pay attention and ask ourselves, am I constructing a proxy, another false self, as in opposition to the false self that I'm aware of? Is another false self being constructed that is designed to convince me that it is my true self? Because what you will find, like, for example, if you're doing self-observation and there's this new voice pops up in your head that is strangely judgmental about what you're observing, if you're observing yourself, and then all of a sudden the new voice pops up and says, oh yeah, look what this is doing, look how he's manipulating you, and look, he's doing this and he's doing that. And it's like this voice seems to know everything that your false self is doing, but he's very clear about it. It's kind of judgmental about it. Oh, you got to let go of this and let go of that, blah, blah. Like, as this becomes weaker and weaker and perhaps more atrophied, this grows stronger and stronger and stronger. And you think, oh, okay, well, I'm developing my higher self. But that's a grift, right? It's the same false self allowing its old persona to atrophy and be weak while this one grows, but really it's a bait and switch. Yeah, it's another grift, it's another scam. And it's taking place in our psychology. So we want to be like, we talk about being mindful, we talk about self-observation, and self-remembering and all of these things. But after these individuals showed up this week for me, I'm like, no, you know what? We have to be clear that the adversary is far more subtle and clever and insidious, and that we have to be able to step inside the shoes of an entity that gets off on, winning over its mark. It's a game, and its very life, its very existence depends upon successfully, right, making its mark. And we are that mark, right? We are that target. And we need to be aware of that. That everywhere we go, there's a target on our back. But the marksman, the hunter, the fisherman, and the con artist, right, is not outside of us. So just remember that. Don't let yourself be bamboozled, and don't let yourself be distracted by all the con men and con artists out there. I mean, yeah, you got to beware of them as well. You got to be conscious of all of that, but understand that all of that, don't let that be a distraction and let you forget of what the dog and pony show and what the con artist, what the snake oil salesman inside of your own psychology is selling you today. Does anybody have any comments or questions? you may find after today that if you in your travels and watching other videos and podcasts, you may discover you will be listening to people a little bit more carefully. And certainly if you run across anybody making certain claims, that you will be listening to their language very carefully indeed. And the more you do, the more you will discover that you thought politicians were bad in terms of, talking a lot and saying nothing, right? Because politicians are, they're always engaging in doublespeak. But the thing is that they're usually very bad at it. But now you've seen some people who are rather good at it. And the more you attune your consciousness to that, the more that you might discover that it's a lot more prevalent than you realized before. So, once again, any other questions or comments before we sign off for today? I hope you found today somewhat valuable or useful. I was a little bit distracted today from the standpoint of we're clearing out the house. My brother's up from the States, and he's sort of in a very he's only here for a short period of time, and so he's got a lot of stuff that we have to do on the house in a very short period of time now, and so that's really intense, and that was a lot on my mind today, this morning, and right up until the live stream began. So, but enough of what we talked about today. Enough of that happened earlier in the week. So it's not hopefully it wasn't too much of a interference. So again, any other questions or comments really quickly? I want to thank you for spending your time with me as well, again, as always, on Sunday afternoon. And I hope you have a excellent week. And I look forward to seeing you again next week. And until then, as always, inferential peace. Take care, everyone. Bye for now.